All right, so today we're looking at completing the square to convert a quadratic from standard form to vertex form. You can see these two equations over here on the right hand side. The one thing I'd like to point out about the two equations is that in the standard form you have A, B, and C, but in the vertex form all we have is A, H, and K, and so the A's are the same. BC has nothing to do with your H and K. But using completing the square is what we'll use to convert from standard form to vertex form. So assuming that the A value is 1, so there's no coefficient in front of x squared except for 1, your first step will be to set your equation equal to 0. Then you will add or subtract the C value to get your x squared plus bx alone. Now here you're going to have a open spot. That open spot is going to be where we put a new number in to help us complete the square, and so that number is going to be half of your b value squared. So whatever your b is, divide it by 2 and square it. It will always be a positive number. Now what you do to the left you must also do to the right. So if you notice down here in step 3, we need to add that to both sides. To get it into vertex form, using b over 2 squared is going to allow us to set up a special factoring situation to where we can factor it into the same two factors, allowing us to write it as a quantity squared, which is important because if you look up here in our vertex form, the main body of this equation is this x minus h squared. So that's what we want it to be able to, we want to be able to factor into this. Now here it's going to be a little more complex into writing this, but whatever your the C value is on the right now, you add that to the B value divided by 2 squared. Okay, so find the result and then you would move it back to the other side of your vertex form so we can write it as a y equals equation. Now special factoring cases, if you look here on example 1, we want to put a value in here for C. There's no equal sign, so we don't have to worry about adding anything to both sides. We just want to practice finding this C value. So my B value, here's our B, okay, is 16. So negative 16 divided by 2 squared gives us negative 8 squared, which is going to equal a positive 64. If you're doing your calculator, make sure you put that negative 8 in parentheses. And so what we get is x squared minus 16x plus 64. Now, if you're going to do regular factoring of this without the shortcut, you get x times x is x squared, and then multiples of 64 that have a sum or difference of 16 would be 8 times 8. 8 times 8 is 64. And if they're both negative, they'll give you a negative 16 when you add them. And if you multiply the two negative 8s, then we get a positive 64, which is why we can write this as x minus 8 squared. Now, without doing the regular factoring, you could have figured that out using what I showed you up here in step 4. If you're using your b value or adding half the b value squared, then you should be able to take the x squared gives us our x. Okay, so the x squared gives us our x, and then if you just take half of the middle term, half of negative 16 is negative 8, and then quantity squared. So let's look at the next example here. So our b value is 10, so 10 divided by 2 squared is 5 squared, which is 25. So we have x squared plus 10x plus 25. Again, that value that we add here is always going to be positive because we're squaring, and squaring a positive or a negative is going to give you the same output or the same result. So here, if we use that shortcut, the x squared becomes x. You're going to take half of this number, and taking half of that, let me use a different color. So taking half of this is where we're going to get our plus 5, and then quantity squared. All right, so now let's take that into a regular equation. So we're going to rewrite from standard form into vertex form using completing the square. If you notice on this first example, it is equal to y, so we want to set it equal to 0. So x squared minus 6x plus 10 equals 0. Now 10 does not come from half of 6 squared, so we want to get rid of the 10. We can do that using subtraction since it's positive. And so we get x squared minus 6x equals negative 10. So now here's where we want to do like the previous problems. Take your b value, which is 6, or negative 6. So negative 6 divided by 2 squared gives us negative 3 squared, which is 9. So we're going to add 9 to the left. If you add 9 to the left, you have to add 9 to the right. So this portion here, we can go ahead and factor. And so that factored using the shortcut, the x squared becomes x. Half of the middle term is negative 3 squared. Now that equals what is on the right, which was the opposite of our original c value plus our new c value, and we get a negative 1. Now, your equation started off as equal to y. We want to set it back equal to y. So we want to move the 1 back to the other side. So we're going to add 1 to the right to get rid of it. So we add 1 to the left, giving us the final equation of y equals x minus 3 squared plus 1. Now, if you take your graphing calculator and graph both of these equations and check your table out, you should see the same exact table. All right, let's move on to our next problem. And we'll do a check on this problem just to show you that it multiplies back out. All right, so obviously 12 is not half of 5 squared. So x squared plus 5x, and we'll go ahead and move the 12 to the other side, knowing that it's going to be equal to 0. And so that gives us a negative 12. Half of 5, so 5 over 2 squared, gives us 2.5 squared, which is a 6.25. So plus, we'll do it in a different color, plus 6.25 on the left, so plus 6.25 on the right. And so we can go ahead and factor this using our shortcut. So x from the x squared, and then half of 5 is 2.5, so plus 2.5 squared. And then on our right hand side, negative 12 plus 6.5 gives us a negative 5.75. When you add this to both sides to set our equation back equal to 0, we get a final equation of y equals x plus 2.5 squared plus 5.75. Now, let's go back to the first problem and do the check, because I think you probably like seeing the check on the first problem versus the second one. So if we're going to do a check here, all right, so x minus 3 squared plus 1. We just want to simplify that back out. So we want to get rid of the parentheses by squaring. And so if we square this, remember guys, this is x minus 3 times x minus 3. And I showed you a shortcut for that before, but if you forget, you can always write it like this and do your FOIL. And so we get x squared minus 3x minus 3x plus 9 plus 1. And so x squared minus 6x plus 10, which is what we originally started with. So we know we're correct. And you don't have to do that check. It's good to know how to do that. But again, like I said, for a quick check on a test or quiz, you can look at these in your Y1 and Y2 of your calculator and check the tables. All right, so let's take a look at this example 3. If you notice here that it's not x squared in the front, it's 2x squared. And so that's going to add a little difficulty to our problem. If we come back up here and look at the format of the vertex form, if you notice, there is no coefficient in front of x. Okay, the a value is outside the parentheses. All right, so this is a 1 in front of that x. So you want a 1x squared. Well, we have a 2x squared. But we're going to start this problem off just like the other problem. So 2x squared minus 16x plus 6 equals 0. We want to get rid of our 6, so we subtract 6 from both sides. And that gives us 2x squared minus 16x equals negative 6. Now, let's go back to just our basic factoring with two terms. And actually, because x squared, you have to have just x squared. It doesn't actually even matter if 16 is a multiple of 2 or 2 is a multiple of 16 or not. You got to take the 2 off the x squared. So if we take a 2 outside, or factor out a 2, that leaves us with x squared minus 8x. Okay, so this was a nice problem. 16 or 2 is a multiple of 16, and so it became an 8. So this is my new b value. Okay, so this is the old b. This is the new b. We use the new b. So we're going to take half of 8, or half of negative 8. So negative 8 over 2 squared. So negative 8 over 2 is negative 4 squared is positive 16. Now, here's the part that you have to pay attention to. There's something out in front of the parentheses. Okay? So the 2 being out in front of the parentheses means that we're going to have to multiply everything in the parentheses by 2. In these previous examples, you weren't adding your new term inside of anything. It was just going on the left. All right? So because you have a 2 and inside you have a 16, you have to compensate, and 2 times 16 is 32, so we add 32 to the right-hand side. After that, everything's about the same. We drop our 2 down that was outside the parentheses. We're going to factor this, and so the x squared becomes x. Half your middle term is negative 4 squared. And then we check the right-hand side, and we get negative 6 and 32, which is a positive 26. We want to move that to the other side with subtraction, so we want to subtract 26 on both sides. And so that gives us a final answer of y equals 2 times x minus 4 squared minus 26. And again, you can check that answer by looking at the 2 equations in your calculator. All right, we got time for one last example. All right, again, we have another problem with the leading coefficient other than 1. We're still going to start off by setting this equal to 0. So negative 3x squared plus 12x minus 8 equals 0. We can get rid of the negative 8 by adding 8 to both sides. And so that gives us negative 3x squared plus 12x equals 8. Because of the negative 3 being the leading coefficient, we want to factor that out. Again, it doesn't matter if the 12 is negative 3 is a multiple of 12 or not. You still have to get the x squared by itself. So you take out the 3 or negative 3, giving us x squared. Make sure that when you understand when you factor something out, you're basically dividing by what you're factoring out. So if I'm taking out a negative 3, I'm dividing both of these terms by negative 3. And 12 divided by negative 3 is a negative 4. Okay, so negative 4x equals 8. We have our old b here. And we have our new b. We want to use our new b. And so in using the new b, half of 4 is 2, and 2 squared is 4. Now, Again, because you have a leading coefficient other than 1, you get the -3 out there. Anything inside the parentheses gets multiplied by the -3. So although we wrote plus 4, you really added a -12. And so drop your -3 down, factor your parentheses, the x squared becomes x, take half the middle term, so half of -4 is -2, and then your right hand side, 8 minus 4 is 8 minus 12 is -4. And then we're going to move that -4 back to the other side by subtracting it, so -4 on both sides. And that gives us an equation of y equals -3 times x minus 2 squared. I'm sorry, back here it should have been +4. And so +4 on both sides. Apologize for the mistake, guys. I hope this video helps you.